The New York City Commission on Human Rights does not provide legal advice. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views or position of the Commission. Enjoy the show.
Hello, New York! Welcome back to another episode of Rights Here, Right Now, from the New York City Commission on Human Rights. I'm your host, Jose Rios, Chief of Staff at the Commission. Rights Here, Right Now airs on the last Monday of every month on WHCR 90.3 FM. Each episode will give listeners the info they'll need to live, work, and thrive free from discrimination in our city. All episodes will also be posted on the Commission's website, YouTube channel, and Spotify. As always, before diving into our show, here is a little background information on our agency. The New York City Commission on Human Rights is the city agency that protects New Yorkers from discrimination in employment, housing, and public spaces. The Commission is charged with enforcing the city's human rights law, one of the broadest civil rights law in the nation. The law prohibits discrimination in over 25 protected categories, such as race, age, gender identity, and sexuality. New Yorkers can report discrimination to the Commission by calling 212-416-0197 or visiting our website, nyc.gov/humanrights. The Commission also seeks to prevent discrimination by conducting outreach to educate New Yorkers on their rights and responsibilities under the human rights law. The Commission provides trainings and workshops that detail the protections enshrined in the law. Our trainings are grounded in the idea that our rights are interconnected and that we all have a role to play to advance equity in New York City. You can request a training on our website. Again, that's nyc.gov/humanrights. And I am very happy to say that today I'm joined once again by the Commission's Deputy Commissioner of Policy and External Affairs, JoAnn Kamuf Ward. JoAnn, welcome back.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
JoAnn, we don't have a guest today, so I will ask you and you can ask me what our favorite thing is to do in New York.
Okay. Since it's fall, I will highlight my favorite New York City activity, which is cheering on the marathon runners every year. So I live at mile 5 of the marathon, and we put out coffee and baked goods and go cheer on the runners all day long.
I'm so sad that I will not be able to view the marathon this year. That's also my favorite thing to do. I love setting up shop. Like, I have my chair and I have my microphone, and the change in face when you scream someone's name out is the best part. Now I'm going to turn this into a plea to any listeners who are going to run. If you are going to run and you haven't planned to write your name on your shirt, please write your name on your shirt. I think it's really helpful.
And if you're going to cheer, say as many names as possible and brighten up someone's day. Jose.
Yes.
What's your favorite fall activity in New York?
All right. Well, I'm not going to say the marathon, even though it is marathon day. Since we're going into October tomorrow, all the dog Halloween costume marches that happen in parks is my favorite thing in the world. Seeing animals in costumes, but only if they're happy about it, because I don't want to see sad animals in costumes. It's also nice to see animals with their people matching. I had a friend who a couple years ago did a Beetlejuice thing where her dog was dressed in the red dress and she was dressed as Beetlejuice. That was adorable.
For anyone who's in 8th grade or any adult caring for someone who's in 8th grade, the high school lottery opens tomorrow. So I will be on a New York City Public Schools journey with many of you as we navigate the 700 plus programs that students can apply to for high school.
Yes, to any parent out there who has a child going into middle school or high school, Godspeed.
We're going to make it, guys.
There is a lot happening around the Commission. I mean, we've been stuck in a reporting period for a number of things. And so one of the things that we can talk about today is our annual report, which has just been submitted. So we can provide some highlights. There's other pieces as well that have been happening. We're preparing for fair chance housing to go into effect in January. We are preparing for rules to come out of the Commission. And so a lot of that work comes out of your team, JoAnn. So maybe we can start off with some of the stuff that the Commission has been working on.
Yeah, that sounds good. I want to also flag for New Yorkers two pieces of legislation that were recently passed by City Council and will likely go into effect later this month. They build on the theme of the work that we do at the Commission on Human Rights, challenging anti-Black racism and also thinking about advancing equity. So these two pieces of legislation go hand in hand in many ways. One is a bill related to reparations, and one is a bill related to creating a truth, healing, and reconciliation process in New York City. So for those of you who follow reparations legislation or advocacy, there's many examples internationally. There have been some examples in the U.S. of payments of reparations to specific communities for harm that they have experienced. And there's been a lot of advocacy at the federal level for a bill called H.R. 40, which would set up a task force to study what reparations could look like at the national level. Last year, New York State passed reparations legislation that sets up a statewide examination of reparations, and the bill that I'm speaking about now would set up a similar process in New York City, so looking at what a reparations package could potentially look like, who would potentially receive reparations, which is often kind of reduced to the idea of monetary compensation, but really includes a lot more than that in terms of recognition of harm, guarantees of not repeating harm in the future, and policy and legislative change. The bills here in New York City are Intro 242A and Intro 279A. A means they have been edited, so there was a prior version, and then A is the next version. Both of those bills would be implemented by newly created entities in New York City, including the Commission on Racial Equity, which we will also talk about in future episodes.
So we had Katedra on the show last month, and we talked a little bit about the anti-Black racism work that's happening at the commission, and also just the racial equity work that's going hand in hand with this. And I think this is an interesting point in our city's history. In many ways, in order to prevent future harms, you have to recognize past harms. And I think that this is one of the things that this legislation does. It recognizes systemic harms that have happened in the past, have been institutionalized in our city and in our nation, and try to forge a path forward and establish trust with communities who have long had the short end of the stick from their government.
An important piece of it is thinking about the historical roots, but the ongoing impacts, right? So it feels comfortable sometimes to talk about historic wrongs, but really to dig into how that continues to play out every day is much more challenging, and what these bills are meant to address.
Now, for maybe some folks who may not be aware of how city government operates, we operate on this weird 2-calendar system. We have a calendar year, and then we have a fiscal year. So when we talk about plans and accomplishments, at this time, you're going to hear us talk about the beginning of the cycle, because our fiscal year is July to June. So a lot of the initiatives that we plan are on that same schedule.
Yeah. So I would love to talk a little bit about a law that we will be implementing, we meaning the Commission on Human Rights, which is, I think, really exciting, has the potential to be hugely impactful. We call this law the New York City Fair Chance Housing Law, Local Law 24 of 2024. This law will go into effect on January 1st of 2025, and the legislation is really about limiting the use of criminal background checks in the New York City housing market. It prohibits discrimination against housing renters, so people applying for housing, people looking also to buy co-ops and condos, as well as protections for current tenants. And it places guardrails on housing providers and when they can look at or ask about criminal history. So that means that in housing applications, you can't state limitations based on criminal history, point blank. It means that you cannot treat tenants and applicants differently solely because of the existence of criminal history. And it also puts limitations on when housing providers can conduct background checks and what information they can look at. So there's both a timing piece of it and there's a substantive piece of it that says landlords, you can only look at certain recent convictions when someone is applying for housing, because the goal of this law is to have housing providers focus on the qualifications of an individual when they're applying for housing at the time that they're applying, not thinking about what might have come out of a criminal legal process that may or may not have involved a trial, and really limiting the use of criminal background checks, which studies have shown have a lot of inaccuracies and errors. So if you're an individual who has potentially committed a misdemeanor crime 10 years ago, or an individual whose name is confused with someone else who committed a misdemeanor 10 years ago, this law is putting guardrails in place so that that does not impact your search for housing today in New York City.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when this was coming out, were very confused, thinking that this is going to fully eliminate the use of criminal history in housing. And this is actually just adding guardrails to the use of it. What we've found, and what other entities have found through research, is that criminal history is not always a good indicator of whether or not someone is a good tenant.
Yeah, 100%. And the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is known as HUD, has said exactly what you just said, Jose. Criminal history is not a good predictor of tenancy. We know, in fact, the inverse, that people who don't have access to stable housing may be more likely to recidivate or return to jail because they don't have stable housing and the ability to build economic stability that is available to others who may not have committed potentially a crime many years ago, or pled guilty to a crime but never had a trial, or have an inaccurate background check. So there's lots of reasons that people are denied housing, which are antithetical to the kind of foundation of our law, which is to ensure everyone is treated equally and in housing. As you were saying, it's really about thinking about, can this person afford to pay? And that includes, of course, the topic we've talked about many times before, any lawful source of income. And that's really the main characteristic someone should be looking at. And the kind of context for this law is that there's significant recognition by legislatures everywhere, but including in New York State. Criminal history really becomes a barrier to many aspects of life, perpetuating inequity along racial lines, along lines of national origin. The Clean Slate Act was passed at the state level before this law was even passed in New York City, which actually seals convictions at a certain point in time, again, to ensure that something that may have happened in the past doesn't continue to impact your ability to thrive for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said in there was really impactful, that like having stable housing is a huge factor in being able to avoid recidivism and making sure that folks have an opportunity to re-enter into society and have the tools that they need at their disposal to have stable employment, have stable housing, and be productive members of community. We've had fair chance protections for a while in employment. We're kind of seeing this as an extension of that into housing, right?
Yeah, so for many decades in, again, New York State and New York City, there have been guardrails placed on what employers can look at when they are weighing someone's qualifications for a job. And just like with most of the protections in our law, these guardrails are in place so that you're looking at an individual's skills and qualifications in employment or potential to fulfill the lease obligations for someone moving into housing, and to help ensure that those are the same criteria for every applicant, no matter how they identify or what they look like. The commission, I think, is really well placed to enforce the housing law. Some of you who have listened to past episodes have talked and heard speak some of the members of our housing and enforcement team. And this piece of legislation in particular was also really pushed forward by a coalition of advocates from many local community-based organizations, as well as New York City and national reentry organizations. So there's a large coalition pushing for this, and it's been on the city council agenda for several years before passing. I should also note, while New York is an amazing place and has an extremely broad anti-discrimination law to protect New Yorkers, we're not the first jurisdiction to have a fair chance housing law. They're all a little bit different in different parts of the country, but there is one right across the river in the state of New Jersey. There's a fair chance housing law. In Cook County, Illinois, in Detroit, Michigan, and other cities and states across the country. So we'll be learning from them too.
Has your team already begun speaking with those jurisdictions or looking into how they've applied their laws and see what challenges they might be having?
Yes. So we have spoken in both looking at the legislation in the beginning, preparing to speak with City Council about the legislation. We've been, talking to advocates who support the law and advocates who have concerns about the law. And we've been talking to local agencies like ours and other jurisdictions, again, either at the state or city level, so that we can take lessons learned from those jurisdictions. And we are developing resources now to get out to the public before the law goes into effect in January. And we'll definitely be speaking more about this in the coming weeks and months.
For folks who might be wondering why CCHR is the agency to oversee this type of thing, I think it's really interesting to note that criminal background checks have been applied differently based on different landlords. And so when you have that landscape where policies and practices are applied differently, that's where the room for discrimination exists, right? Having this type of addition to our law will help us make sure that these practices are applied as equitable as possible across the housing landscape in our city.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note it is not required for any private landlords to run background checks.
Yep.
So if you do not currently run background checks, nothing in your housing process is going to change. If you do run background checks, there's going to be new timelines and guidance, as I was saying, about what you can look at and when in the housing process, much later in the process, so that it's not the kind of first information that you are making a decision upon. And there's also some exceptions in the law for very small landlords and also for federally subsidized housing. So much more to come on that score.
Yeah, this goes into effect in January. So please, to all of our listeners, expect to have more time dedicated on the radio show, either right before the launch of this or in January itself, to have more information. It's usual when these types of things happen, JoAnn, that we go into public education mode. And so there will be pieces that will come out of the commission to share more information. Our team will be working on a campaign to educate New Yorkers on those pieces, but we'll also create normally fact sheets and literature that has more information.
To that end, one of the lesser known things I think that city agencies do is that we issue rules that explain in greater detail what the law says and means and looks like in practice. And those are evolving rules and documents based on what's happening in the world around us. So once the law goes into effect, we will continue to hear from New Yorkers, I mentioned already, advocates in the housing space. We'll be continuing to hear from housing providers and applicants and tenants, so we understand what's happening on the ground and can ensure that people understand what the law allows and what it prohibits. And we're doing a similar thing now with the Fair Chance employment rules. So this is a law, as I mentioned already, has been in effect for several decades. It was amended a few years ago, and we are working diligently on releasing new rules that clarify some of the portions of that law. There was a public comment period, and we had a hearing recently, so that will also be something that's forthcoming. So don't forget to go to the CCHR website.
Oh, that's nyc.gov/human rights.
It would be great to move into a conversation about some of our accomplishments from the past year and what folks can find in the CCHR annual report.
So I wanted to start off our conversation about the annual report by reading the letter from our commissioner. I think it highlights a lot of the achievements that we've been able to accomplish this year. And again, like as I was saying earlier, when we say this year, we mean July of 2023 to June of 2024. So some of these things might straddle two different calendar years. We talk about it as our last fiscal year. So this is a message from Commissioner and Chair Annabelle Palma as part of our annual report. I'll read this on her behalf. As I complete my third year as Commissioner and Chair of this vital mission-driven city agency, I cannot help but express the gratitude I feel to the people of New York for entrusting me with this opportunity to lead the city's efforts to fight for equity and address all forms of discrimination. My own experience as a union representative, organizer, and city councilor have cemented in me the understanding that if rights are not enjoyed by all, they lose their impact. I've devoted my career to public service because I believe that everyone deserves the right to live, work, and thrive free from discrimination. I cherish this opportunity to reflect on and share with you the impact of the Commission on Human Rights' dedicated staff over the past fiscal year. Our mission to promote equity, protect civil rights, and foster a sense of unity in our diverse city has never been more crucial. When discrimination and bias remain unchecked, no matter where it occurs, at home, at school, or on the street, it has a ripple effect. But when we unite against bias and hate, we can harness our energy to create waves of inclusion and hope. As we have witnessed in this year, what happens on a global stage plays out on our streets. Our hearts are aching from the human suffering witnessed around the globe, but that suffering is never a justification to harass or discriminate against fellow New Yorkers. This year, our commitment to fostering a city free from discrimination faced unprecedented challenges as intergroup conflicts and rising tensions tested the resolve of our communities. Instances of discrimination and bias were often in the news, impacting all of us, and underscoring the urgency and importance of our work. The Commission has met these challenges with unwavering fortitude, addressing the needs of those affected and reinforcing our dedication to justice and inclusion. The work of this agency embodies the values that make me proud to be born and raised New Yorker. We are one city, altogether different and altogether here. At the Commission, we recognize that our city's strengths lies in its diversity, and it is our duty to protect and celebrate that diversity while working towards a more inclusive and equitable future for everyone. This year, we redoubled our outreach and held days of visibility against hate. We built new partnerships and expanded bystander intervention trainings and cultural competency trainings. We ran campaigns to educate New Yorkers about their rights, and we secured justice for New Yorkers through pre-complaint interventions, settlements, and mediations. As we look ahead, we remain dedicated to addressing the multifaceted challenges that are times and building a city where every individual is valued is respected. Thank you for your support and for standing with us to fulfill our mission to uphold human rights and promote justice across all communities. So that's the letter from Commissioner Palma that opens up our annual report. And I think it highlights some of the work that we've done in what has been, I think, a challenging year in many ways. And we've, as a commission, had to think of ways to work around some of those challenges. But even through challenges, we achieved a lot this year.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to dive into some numbers.
Love numbers.
To show what we did. So much of our focus is on preventing discrimination, recognizing the dignity and humanity of New Yorkers, and it's very hard to show that in an annual report or in any set of numbers. So we continue to think about how we illustrate the impact of our work. But there are numbers, so we'll share some numbers. One of the things that we're really proud of this year is that we've reached more New Yorkers than ever before.
Yeah.
So a record number of people attended either our workshops or our trainings or our outreaches, so 142,000 and change. But that's really only a slice because we have also, as you all know, because you're here, we started a radio show. Our reach on social media and through our website is much, much more expansive than the in-person kind of engagements that we have. But I think those are really pivotal to our success.
Yeah, that number, that 142,398 people, totally just accounts for the work that we do in person or virtual through our outreach team. And it's, like you were saying, it's trainings, it's workshops, it's events, it's tabling, and it doesn't take into account the many, many New Yorkers who engage with us digitally through our social media or through the radio show or our website. But it is a record number for us. I believe last year we were somewhere a little bit above 130,000. So we continue to grow our outreach to folks. And within that piece, we also were able to, in order to reach 142,000 New Yorkers, we hosted almost 3,000 unique engagement activities. So again, events, workshops, trainings, those pieces to get to that point.
We have talked about this previously as well, but one of the ways that the agency ensures that it is reaching communities is through our multilingual efforts. We have materials that are available in English, Spanish, Mandarin, Bengali, Urdu, Punjabi, French, Arabic, Russian, and more. And that's some of our trainings and our outreaches occur in those languages as well. One particularly sought after training that we offer that's been available this year is our bystander intervention training, but that's really a part of the Community Relation Bureau efforts at sort of building trust and building intergroup relations and communications, which are so essential. So there's other elements like talking circles and community conversations that really help people identify what bias looks like and also how to avoid violating the human rights law by engaging in discriminatory practices. And we know at CCHR that not everyone is comfortable turning to government when they've experienced or have fear of experiencing bias and discrimination. So we have ensured in the past years that we are working closely with community organizations. And one of the elements of programming that was launched by CCHR last year, though it existed before, was grants to address bias and hate. So this was really an effort to not only fund grassroots efforts to address bias and hate, leveraging the fact that community organizations are often the most credible voices in local communities, but it also allowed a bit of an exchange between our agencies and these community organizations who received funding. They heard from us what the protections of the city human rights law are, and we heard from them what they're seeing on the ground. And there were a number of exciting initiatives from public service announcements to trainings and events and beyond.
There's a couple of new pieces into the annual report this year, one of which I think you worked really well on because of a new law, but we've expanded on how we've reported our work in engaging with older adults.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this has also been a citywide initiative. I think there's a lot of focus on recognizing that agencies have particular mandates, but that people's experiences as New Yorkers don't necessarily fall into the lines that exist for each agency. So we have been part of really a citywide effort, which is the city's cabinet for older New Yorkers, that brings a whole host of agencies together to think about how we are meeting the needs of New Yorkers of every age. I think we've mentioned this before on the radio show, but our law prohibits age discrimination for every age. Federal law and some state laws have ages above which discrimination is protected. Ours does not. So young people are protected throughout their lifetime as they age. And New York's population of older adults is definitely growing. And this administration and agencies, including New York City Department for the Aging, have been really focused on ensuring that city services are there for folks. So we have worked at updating our trainings on working with a workforce of multi-ages, and that includes thinking about best practices in hiring and inclusion in the workplace. We have also done a whole host of events really focused on older adults who are either in the workforce or have retired from the workforce to think about what bias looks like. And I would say the cabinet is also really working to bring intergenerational gatherings together, which I think is such an important part of how we understand and experience our city and how we learn from the people that came before us and recognize the potential of our city.
One of the things that you said in your remarks was, we don't have limits on age. When we say everyone should live, work, and thrive, we really do mean everyone should live, work, and thrive free from discrimination. And so that's why our agency has a very mindful approach to engaging with youth. And so this year we were able to also grow our work with youth, and our agency was able to host over 300 events across the city targeting youth. And we just wrapped up our third cohort of our Youth for Equity and Solidarity initiative, which includes our Yes Council, who are a group of young leaders that offer strategic advice to the commission and bring fresh perspectives to the table.
Yeah, and one of the things that occurred last year with youth, which I think was really exciting, was that we brought a lot of high school students to the United Nations to speak about human rights issues that are happening in their communities and in their schools. And so students took the stage in one of the large UN rooms, often for member states, and presented to city officials. They presented to administrators and teachers and each other, as well as representatives of UN member states, about not only the challenges that they see, but some of the solutions they propose. And I think that's a really awesome opportunity to really connect. As you were saying, Jose, everything that happens globally has ramifications in New York City because we have such a diverse population and a huge amount of people and are home to the United Nations. So it really, to me, I come out of the international arena and international advocacy, and often I think a youth voice is not at the table. And so really thinking about ways to shift that paradigm is really important.
And youth have very meaningful things to contribute to the conversation because they're experiencing things from a different perspective. And even though I think many of us think, oh, well, we were their age once, so we know what they're thinking, they're experiencing that age at a different time in a different landscape. So when I was in high school, we had social media, but not to the extent that we have it now. I am not ashamed to say that my phone in high school only dialed and made phone calls and made text messages. And so as time evolves, perspectives of different ages also evolve.
I had no cell phone in high school. So, yes, agreed. And I think also, just the idea that so many students are the conduit of information for their parents and caregivers and other folks in their community. So that reach is really quite expansive, and they're translating a lot of experiences beyond their own into the potential for policymaking.
I think another piece that was really impactful for me in our work around revitalizing relationships with Indigenous communities, our agency has been playing this role in kind of facilitating, making space for Indigenous communities in government spaces. Last year, we had the first ever roundtable at City Hall where we brought in Lenape folks to talk about issues facing Indigenous communities, and that was huge for fiscal year 23. For fiscal year 24, the Commission co-coordinated the first ever Native American Heritage Month reception at Gracie Mansion. This historic event marked a really key milestone for our city in bringing together Indigenous leaders, city officials, consulate representatives, and UN staff to discuss issues, view cultural performances, and really kind of invite back into the space Indigenous communities. And so for me, that was a very powerful moment, and I'm very grateful that our agency had an opportunity to play a role in that.
Yeah, and I think, that also ties into the kind of reparations and truth and healing conversations we were having in the beginning about, not only what is the history of where we came from, but how does that play out today. And I think one thing that we should talk more about in the show moving forward is also the celebration of 400 years, how we grew as a city, who is included, who is not included, and what that means, but also as a government, how we ensure that that people who are left out of decision making are now included. And I think that the work with Indigenous communities and Native communities, whether they're native to the United States or many people who are Indigenous in another country and have come here and are now New Yorkers, and thinking about what that looks like.
Absolutely. And then we've also hit milestones in housing. Our partnership with Fordham University to provide continuing education credits for realtors for free is a huge step forward for our agency in tackling housing discrimination. And so I think it's been a big year for engagement and outreach for the Commission as a whole.
Yeah, and I think, as we were saying before, there's prevention, and that is where we always start. I think one of the many tools also in the Commission's toolbox is enforcement, right? So not only are we focused on preventing discrimination by helping people understand the law, when discrimination does occur, our agency is there to hear from individuals. And so on the enforcement side, we also have accomplished quite a lot during fiscal year 24. So I'll say another record year, reaching and being reached by New Yorkers. So we had the highest number of inquiries ever on record. Over 13,000 people contacted via email, phone call, or by walking into our offices with allegations of discrimination that they have experienced or witnessed. And as I think we've said before, we are a file as of right agency. So if people come to us and have a claim within our jurisdiction, then we have an obligation to respond to that. So we handle all of those inquiries in due course. A lot of them get referred to other agencies or community partners, but we also resolve a lot of them. In addition to, letting folks know where they can go if we are not the right place for them at the Commission on Human Rights, our law enforcement bureau solved over 300 claims via the pre-complaint interventions, which are early resolution matters that we can help someone who has experienced potentially differential treatment without ever having to file a complaint or go through the litigation process. Maybe not surprising to some of our listeners, source of income was the highest area of claims for pre-complaint resolution, and disability was the second highest area of pre-complaint interventions. If you missed the number, 300 pre-complaint resolutions. It's a great number. It means that 300 New Yorkers had an issue that they needed resolved, handled by the Commission on Human Rights. So that's really fantastic. Not everything is a good candidate for pre-complaint intervention. And the Commission also went through the formal process of filing more than 360 complaints of discrimination. And that included almost double that number of claims. So around 600 claims in those 366 cases. As we've mentioned before, the highest area of claims is in employment, and that continued to be the case in fiscal year 24. Followed by housing and then public accommodations. For those of you who watch changes to the human rights law, you'll know that salary transparency was added not that long ago, and that was also an area where there were a significant number of complaints filed, many of them filed by the Commission itself on behalf of New Yorkers through our Commission-initiated tools. So we filed complaints, we solved cases through pre-complaint resolution, and we also resolved over 445 complaints that had been sitting with our agency that were reported in past years. And that, I think, is so important for our work, because when cases are resolved via settlement, which is 40% of the cases that are filed are resolved via settlement, there's a huge potential for affirmative relief. And that means policy changes in practices, and potentially monitoring by the Commission to both rectify what has happened in an individual case, but also to prevent future harm from occurring.
There's so much to talk about that there is not enough time in the world to go through all of the achievements in this annual report. But one thing that I wanted to highlight that I think doesn't get a lot of attention is that our agency was able to test over 900 entities. And so we have a dedicated testing team. The Commission uses testing as a long-standing and effective civil rights investigation tool to assess if discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations is occurring. And we leverage tips received through the agency's info line, information from stakeholders, and other sources to determine which entities to test. And so over 947 entities tested by phone and online is a big number for our small but mighty team of testers. One of the things that I just mentioned was our info line. And so I think, as we mentioned, that we received a record number of inquiries from New Yorkers, I think it's also important to know that one of the reasons why we were able to grow is because this year we launched our live info line. So previously, folks who called the Commission would have to leave a voicemail and then our team would get back to you. And now our info line team answers the call live. So between the hours of 9 and 4, when you call 212-416-0197, that goes to our info line team, and who can talk to New Yorkers, and New Yorkers have quicker access to speaking to Commission staff. One last thing I want to highlight is the Commission does our work in many languages. This year, our staff fielded 1,147 inquiries in 16 languages other than English. Top languages other than English being Spanish, Russian, and Mandarin. I also want to take a minute to just highlight our staff. We take pride in maintaining a staff that reflects the diversity of our city. And so English, Spanish, Hindi, Nepali and Portuguese, Arabic, Haitian Creole, those are all languages that are represented among the 25 languages represented at the Commission from staff who can speak them.
And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that almost half of our comms team is in the room with me right now as we record this radio show, and they are really responsible for amplifying the work that is done by the lawyers like me at the commission who don't always have a real sense of how to take legislation and make it digestible and understandable for New Yorkers, both through the survey that we've highlighted in many of these episodes, in which you can still fill out. So go to our survey. It's also on our website.
nyc.gov/togethernyc.
But we've had a huge social media and print media presence, again, in multiple languages. So shout out to the comms team. And one thing that is in the annual report is that, we work on New York City legislation, and that is super important. We also contribute to court cases through amicus briefs with the law department and through rules coming down at the federal level, so that the experience that New York has of what has worked or what has been challenging in enforcing laws is informing what's happening in other jurisdictions as well. So we are very proud of the work we do, but we know we can always be learning and we can always be sharing what we have learned. So those are just some tidbits of the small but mighty Commission on Human Rights.
JoAnn, so happy to have you back this month with us on the radio show. We could sit here and talk literally for another hour of all the accomplishments our agency is able to achieve this last year, but we're at our time. We have to say goodbye, but do you want to highlight one last thing?
Yes, it is voting season.
Yes.
So have a voting plan. If you live in New York City, know where you're going to go, know what's on the ballot, choose wisely. And if you're out of state or voting somewhere else, mail in those ballots.
We're also at City College, so for any students who might not know where or how they can vote, please reach out to our commission. Part of our job is to ensure people are registering to vote, or reach out to your local schools to find out how they're organizing voter resources for their students as well. So everyone who can, vote. Well, that's it. That's our show for this month. We will see you again next month, the last Monday of October. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.
Please wear a costume.